think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming to our first America 250 program. We're calling it Forging America. You guys see what we did there? Forge, pigeon forge, forging. Okay. So our first program tonight is with the Sidesaddle Storytellers. This is the founder, Ann Hatfield. We will continue our Forging America program coming up on Tuesday. So basically all of May and June, Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have a Forging America program. My vision was just kind of like Colonial Williamsburg. What was America like? What were we like here 250 years ago-ish? We weren't settled yet, but not soon after. So there's going to be something every Tuesday and Thursday night. So check us out on Facebook. We have the list here in the library also. Tomorrow also is our 25th anniversary here at the library. So if you guys are around, stop on by. We're going to have some good treats, a really special coffee brewer. And then really just to get back to our presentation tonight, a little about Ann. She is a biologist by day and an equestrian by weekend. Her passion for history, horses, and fashion is what inspired her to start a living history group. They are devoted to preserving and promoting the art of side saddle riding. She and her horse Boomer, he's right out back, have traveled extensively teaching about women's history and showcasing how elegant this sport is. So after she does her indoor presentation here, we can all just kind of single file out the back. Most of you are kind of familiar with the library. Boomer is chilling out back with some hay and some treats. And she'll continue on with the rest of her program out back. So let's welcome Ann Hatfield.
Thank you. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you guys so much for having me out tonight. And of course, thank you to the Pigeon Forge Library for hosting this. I really appreciate being invited to come and speak to you all about side saddle. So I know you're probably all wondering, do I dress like this every day? And the answer is no, only for you guys, but sometimes on the weekends, but rarely on Thursdays. So kind of a different outfit for me during the week, but I am really excited to be here. So my name is Ann Hatfield, like she said, and I'm here with the Society of Sidesaddle Storytellers. We are a living history group that is devoted to teaching about women's history and side saddle riding, and also preserving and promoting the sport itself. I kind of came up with the idea because I love side saddle, I love history and fashion, and there just weren't a lot of shows and opportunities to ride side saddle here in Tennessee. And so I kind of came up with the idea to just make my own opportunities. And I love to sew and I love fashion, so this is kind of just a good way for me to put all of these things together. But through this, it's been a really cool experience to get to meet a lot of really interesting women, and I've had several other people come and join and bring their horses for events too, and new people have come out and taken lessons and have gotten to try it out for themselves, and some people are interested also in trying it out. So it's definitely been kind of a fun journey, exploring women's history and equestrian history through this as well. And I just have to give a shout out. My old history teacher is here tonight, and I would not be here today if it were not for Miss Webb, so thank you.
She's really easy to teach.
And like we said, so tonight we're going to be starting off in here with the PowerPoint, just kind of giving you a basis on the history of side saddle, how they changed throughout time, and then we'll talk about some of the women who were really well known for riding side saddle, and then we'll move outside, and it'll take me a second to get the horse ready, but I have some more saddles out there for you guys to look at and some more pictures, and I'll ride him around a little bit and do a short demo for you all. And feel free to take as many photos as you guys want. We do have social media, so please feel free to tag us because we'd love to connect and keep up with you, and we do lots of local events. We have an event coming up at the Mabry Hazen House June 13th, and we should have 4 horses there, so keep that in mind if you're interested. We would love to have you all. And I believe if anyone needs restrooms, located out in the front if you need them. So let's get into it. So why side saddle? I assume if you all are here tonight, you're probably either someone who likes horses or likes history. But I think side saddle is so incredible because there's almost 1,000 years of history to choose from. And I think typically we kind of associate side saddle the most with the Victorian era because, this is when we had photographs and you see the really elegant women in their top hats and their corsets up on their beautiful hunt horses riding aside. But it actually got its start all the way back in the Middle Ages. So women have been riding this way for almost 1,000 years. But you may be more familiar with people like Queen Victoria, Annie Oakley, or Queen Elizabeth II, or the first. But women riding side saddle were breaking societal norms, and they showed their bravery and their courage and their skill while doing this. And of course, they were in dresses and corsets and skirts at the same time. And it is a sport. It's a blend of athleticism and grace and skill at the same time. So it's a lot of things going on at once. But I think that it's really important not only to keep, the skill of the sport alive, but also to remember these women, because these are the stories of our great-great-grandmothers. And it's, I think, very important to honor them and to recognize that they did important things to get us where we are today. So starting with the history of side saddle, 1100s, 1200s, we start seeing women riding in what we call the pillion saddles. So up top, the lady with the hawk, she would have been on a pillion saddle. Essentially, this was just a pillow that would sit behind the man's saddle on the horse, and she would wrap her arms around him and just hold on tight, but he would be doing the steering and the majority of the work. But this all kind of came about because at this point in time in history, a woman's job was to produce an heir. And for whatever reason, the men at this point thought that if a woman straddled a horse, that it would essentially jostle her insides and make her lose the ability to have children, which obviously we know is not true, but that's just what they thought. So to keep your woman pure and to keep her intact, they wanted her to ride side saddle. Yeah. So of course, that was not very practical riding on a pillow behind a man. So eventually they changed this into basically a chair saddle. So the saddle, the red saddle with the little footrest, this was kind of our first iteration of the side saddle. So we start seeing this in the 1300s. And at this time in history, you would have been seeing, documents and photographs or paintings done by monks oftentimes. So this is kind of where we're getting that history from. But the first woman that we have known evidence of riding in a side saddle was Anna Bohemia all the way back in 1382. So she was being sent as a 15-year-old to travel from Bohemia all the way to England to marry King Richard II. And of course, she was 15. This was a man that she had never even met. She was traveling hundreds of miles away from home to give up her family and her friends forever to go be, the next queen. But luckily for her, it did actually work out well, and it was said that he was a loving and devoted husband. But because they did want to keep her intact, so she could have the heir when she got there, she was made to ride in a side saddle. So we do have multiple paintings of her riding in a side saddle, but this would have been, an elegant display of her wealth and her money on her way to go meet her king. And it's also important to note that she would not have been steering the horse at this time. A groom would have been leading her on the ground at a walk. So the side saddle stays about that way until the 1500s. Catherine de' Medici comes along and she puts a horn on the front of the side saddle, like the one down there. And this allows the woman to basically hook her leg around that horn, and she can sit straight in the saddle at this point, and this gives her more control. So you can walk, you can trot, and then you can maybe canter if you're strong enough and can hold on with that thigh. It's still not the most secure thing in the world, but it's definitely going to be a lot better than that chair saddle or the pillow saddle. So Catherine de' Medici made that really popular, but it kind of spread along the noble class. So Queen Elizabeth I was also really well known for riding this way, and she was an avid equestrian. It was said that sometimes she would go riding for up to 12 hours a day, would have to switch to multiple horses, and she would ride astride like a man, and even led her men into battle on horseback at one point. So she was a really incredible woman, and she actually never married. So she kind of broke the norms of society and just did what she wanted, but she said that she was married to the Kingdom of England, did not need a man. But she did like to show off, so she loved her side saddle because it was laced with gold and velvet, and this would allow her to go parade through the towns and basically just show off her wealth and her power to her people. So you go from the pillow saddle to the chair saddle to having the one horn on the saddle. And it stays that way until about the 1830s. and it progresses to having the leaping horn. So that horn on the front, that second horn, is called the leaping horn. And basically, you put your foot in the stirrup and wedge yourself up against that horn, and it holds you really securely in the saddle. So it pretty much takes the women into the future at this point. Previously they were going slow, and then now they could walk, trot, canter, gallop, they could even jump. So they could pretty much do anything that they wanted at this point. And you could kind of see the original side saddles almost as this symbol of oppression, because it was something that the men were telling the women that they had to ride this way because they had to produce a child, and then they had to be slow and be led by a groom. But it took them into the future, and they kind of turned it around and said, well, now with these modern side saddles, we're empowered. We can go out, we can join the men fox hunting, we can jump bigger things than them. We can do races, steeplechase, point to point. So it was like they flipped it and took it to something that gave them some freedom. Because at that point, your husband or your father would have been making a lot of the decisions for you. So for them to be able to have this new side saddle, it allowed them to go out and have some freedom and have some fun and show off. They could go out hunting and be more impressive than the men, and that made them feel really powerful. At the same time, they were in these dresses and looking elegant and beautiful while doing it. So with these new risks comes injuries, unfortunately. So the women got a little cocky. They were jumping things that were too big, they were going too fast, and they had long, pretty skirts, but unfortunately, these skirts kept pulling them off their horse, which was really dangerous. So women were known to get dragged off to death or trampled. So it was really, really dangerous for them. But eventually they decided they could make the safety apron, which is what I'm wearing. And it has no backside. Mine is hooked here on the side. So basically when you're sitting up on the horse, there's no back, and it would keep you from being hung up by your skirts. So that would allow them to go faster, but to do it a lot more safely. And also in the 1870s or so, they came up with the safety stirrup. So if you yank on this stirrup hard enough, it should come out in case of an emergency. So if you're about to fall off your horse, it would hopefully keep you from being hung upside down by your foot in the stirrup. So that ended up protecting a lot of women and saving a lot of lives. And of course, you have to think every invention comes because of some injury or mistake that happened. So it was happening frequently. But kind of moving on to the America birthday theme, there's a couple women that I want to talk about that are women that I think everyone should know. So Sybil Ludington, I don't know if anyone is familiar with her, but you should be because she's amazing. She was known as the female Paul Revere, and she was only 15 years old, so young woman, but basically what she did was her father was a colonel in the Continental Army. And at this time of year, 1776, I think it was at the time, 7. So her father was a colonel in the Continental Army, and the troops, her militia troops, had all gone home for the planting season at this time of year. And so there were no troops around. But they ended up hearing that the British troops were on their way coming to raid the Continental Army's supplies. And so her father, who was this leader, decided that they needed to have someone go out and rally the troops. So they had to send someone door to door to go and get all of the militiamen to come because they didn't have cell phones back then or a fast way to communicate. So someone had to do that manually. And he actually, I think, had 6 or 7 children, but Sybil was the oldest of all of them. So she ended up volunteering to go ride and rally the troops. And she went door to door in the dark of night, in the pouring rain, on her trusted horse and riding in a side saddle. And she ended up riding about 40 miles that night and ended up getting somewhere near 400 men to come and to do their job as the militiamen to protect their supplies. So she was a really brave young woman, incredible, and was thanked personally by General George Washington himself. And Paul Revere gets all the credit for doing this, but she actually rode almost twice as far as he did. So I think she's a pretty impressive young woman. And of course, while you're doing all this, riding the side saddle, you're supposed to just sit there and look pretty. But it's not even just, a sport. You're not doing one thing at a time. There's a lot of things that you have to do together. So you have to look elegant, but it also requires a lot of athleticism, strength, balance, and core muscles, and communication with your horse. Sorry, that was out of order. Moving on to Annie Oakley. Who here is familiar with Annie Oakley? Yeah, she's a fan favorite. We all love her. She was very famous for being a marksman. We all know her for being an incredible sharpshooter, but she was also a really impressive trick rider as well. So she was well known for traveling with the Buffalo Bills Wild West show. And she actually traveled the world. She rode in front of Queen Victoria, Kaiser Wilhelm in a different show, but she got to showcase her sharpshooter skills. But she was also really proud, and she kind of rode with this rough and tumble group of Western people at these shows, but she still wanted to show that she was a lady and she had manners and she had, an upbringing that she thought, she wanted to still uphold, even though she was in kind of these tougher Western settings. And so she rode in skirts and in a side saddle for most of her performances. So she would hang off backwards off of her horse, and she'd pick her hat up off the ground, and she'd shoot off her horse side saddle. And I don't think a lot of people are even aware that she was doing that side saddle. I think we just think of her as shooting, but she was, a multifaceted woman. But, not only was she talented, but she was an outspoken woman as well. She was a huge advocate for women in sports, for helping the poor, and for public education. So she did a lot of good work, not only in, the sport world, but, for helping to, encourage women to have a say for themselves. So some local history for us. If anyone has been to the Ramsey House, Mary Ramsey Woods came from Knoxville and actually traveled out west on the Oregon Trail. And she rode a side saddle out west on her trusted horse, Martha Washington. And she actually was a midwife, so she delivered babies, pretty much all the way from Knoxville all the way to the Oregon Trail, or Oregon Territory. But she was nicknamed the Queen Mother of Oregon. And I actually have a saddle outside, a rail saddle, which was pretty typical of midwives. They liked them because they were a little bit more secure for them in backcountry, going up and down kind of sketchy hills and trails. So I'll point it out to you when we go out there, but definitely an impressive woman. And then we have the side saddle soldiers of Ray County. So during the Civil War, there was a female cavalry unit that called themselves the Ray County Spartans. And this was a group of women that rode in side saddles, and they provided aid to their husbands and their fathers and their sons that were out fighting in the war. And some of them were actually believed to have gone and to have been spies at that time. And I think some were captured at one point. So they definitely had some interesting stories to tell. But I think they all made it back safely eventually. But definitely some very interesting women. So transitioning kind of to the downfall of side saddle. So in the late 1800s, early 1900s, Victorian Edwardian era, women were being a lot more bold. We were fighting for the right to vote. We wanted to be considered equal to men at this point. And a lot of women were involved in protests and parades and marches. And oftentimes the side saddle was actually kind of used as a symbol for them, a political symbol that kind of represented hundreds of years of women being oppressed, because that was how they saw it, that the side saddle held them into the past and that they wanted to move into the future and ride astride with legs on both sides of the horse, like a man in pants. They wanted to have equal rights. So at this time, they actually burned a lot of side saddles, which, I don't blame them. They definitely were fighting for what they thought was important. But Inez Milholland was a really important suffragette to note, and she led a lot of parades and marches all over the US, and she rode astride like a man, but she was very notable. We have a lot of great pictures from her at this time. But it was said, after we got the right to vote in 1920, it was said that women bravely rode into the voting booth as second-class citizens on a side saddle and then galloped out astride. which I think is very powerful. But yeah, this kind of led to the side saddle falling out of popularity at this time because we wanted to be modern women. So 1920s, 30s, 40s, if you had survived the world wars at this point, and if your family still had money, you might still want to show it off. So if you were, an aristocratic woman or a wealthy woman in New England or in the UK or something, if you still had money, you might want to go fox hunt in your side saddle and show that you could still ride aside and still be, elegant and proper. But at this time, it definitely was falling out of favor. And moving to the 1970s or so, we start to see Queen Elizabeth II. She pops up on the TV a lot. I'll move back to her. So Queen Elizabeth had been gifted a horse in the 60s named Burmese from the Canadian Mounted Police. And she fell in love with this horse. It was her favorite horse. And she ended up riding Burmese for 18 years consecutively in this one parade every single year. And she would ride in her side saddle. And we had the television at this point, and so people were seeing her every single year ride side saddle in the Trooping of the Colors ceremony. And it inspired a lot of women. A lot of women wanted to emulate her. They wanted to be elegant and proper, just like the Queen. So it kind of got a new generation of women riding side saddle, 1970s or so. And of course, when her horse Burmese retired, the Queen actually chose to never ride in that parade again. She chose to inspect the troops by carriage for the remainder of her life. She said it was too sad for her to not do it with her horse Burmese, which I can understand. So 1980s or so, we do start getting some more shows that have side saddle featuring and lots of equestrian stuff going on at this time. The Flambards is kind of like the original Downton Abbey, but there's a ton of side saddle in that. So that got a whole new group of people riding side saddle. And then moving on to the 2000s, who has seen Downton Abbey? Probably most of you. And that's actually what got me hooked on side saddle, was seeing Lady Mary Crawley there in the bottom ride her beautiful horse. She fox hunts in this beautiful outfit, and then she does a point-to-point race in the 6th season, I think, and I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. She jumps and she's riding side saddle, and it's just incredible. So that inspired a whole new generation of women to also love side saddle. And today, there's a lot of different disciplines that you can do in a side saddle. Pretty much, anything that you could do in a normal saddle, you could do aside as well. So we have people that do mounted shooting, Western pleasure, fox hunting. People do dressage, show jumping, it's limitless. And it's kind of a team sport. So you're not just sitting there, there's definitely a lot of communication between you and your horse. But because you don't have that right leg, it's a little bit more difficult to communicate with the horse. So typically when you're riding, you use your legs first to steer your horse and then your hands second. And so because you don't have that right leg to steer, it's kind of weird for the horse. You have to figure out how to effectively communicate as a team. But oftentimes, women will ride with a crop in their right hand. And so if your legs are off to the side of the horse, you'll put this crop on the right side of the horse to act as a fake leg, which it's not to hit him or hurt him. It's just pressure to help steer and tell him where to go. And, not every horse takes to it. Some are still kind of confused by it, but I think most horses will pick up on it pretty quickly. And definitely want to note these really amazing ladies. So the first on the left is Esther Stance in Sydney, Australia. She set the world record of the highest side saddle jump back in 1915 at 6 feet 8 inches. And she held on to that record for almost 100 years. And then Susan Oakes in Ireland actually broke it back in 2013 at 6 feet 11 inches. But you will not catch me trying to break that. And there's a couple other events throughout the US and Canada and the UK that like to really focus on side saddle. So the Calgary Stampede in Canada, every year it's a huge rodeo. but they do this side saddle race that showcases Western riding, and they wear these incredible outfits and get out in front of thousands of people and they race. And I actually got to do a race myself this year. We went down to Aiken, South Carolina, and it was an exhibition race, so it was just for fun, just to show off how cool side saddles were. But there were 6 of us, and we were up against 2 thoroughbreds, and my horse is not that fast, so we got left in the dust. But he tried his best, and it was a lot of fun. So we came in 4th, not too bad. That's a little clip. Actually, this was from last year, but I didn't want to put me getting left in the dust, so it's a long distance that we got left behind by. So wrapping up, you know, there's almost 1,000 years of stories and history to choose from with the side saddle, and it's kind of this reflection of, you know, womanhood and how we progressed and changed throughout time. But I think that it's a really empowering art form and a style of riding that, you know, puts us in the shoes of these women, of, you know, our great-great-grandmothers. And, you know, it takes a lot of skill and muscle, but you're also trying to look elegant and pretty at the same time. But I think it's really important to preserve not just the skill, but to also to preserve these stories and to remember, you know, all of these incredible women that came before us. So this is a modern side saddle from 1920. There are not a lot of makers creating new side saddles, so oftentimes we'll have these side saddles from the 20s, 30s that have been restored. So this is fully restored, imported from England. But this side saddle is basically kind of like the Ferrari sports car side saddle. So the side saddles that are over here would be for a lot slower riding. This is for going fast, for jumping, for fox hunting. So your Ferrari sports car compared to kind of more of like a Cadillac ride over there, basically. So this is your leaping horn. This is what helps to hold me onto the saddle. And this top horn is wrapped up in what we call the queen. And the queen, basically, it's just a protective cover to make it a little bit squishier for me, because if you are riding for a long time, it can kind of bruise your leg if you're bumping up against this. And it also helps to push me over and keep me nice and straight in the saddle, which is really helpful.
Does it hurt your back to ride side saddle for a long time?
Good question. So I ride in a corset, and the corset actually helps to keep me really nice and straight, help me not to twist my back. But if you don't wear a corset or a back brace, you might kind of twist your lower back and it might get sore eventually. So, could you come over so I can get on? This is my groom.
Literally and literally.
Yeah, figuratively. Ideally, a man would help to put you in the saddle and mount in privacy where no one's going to see your ankles. Sorry.
Yeah.
Flashed everyone's mind.
That was a field.
So I do have my safety apron on. So there's nothing below my backside right now, so I'm not going to get hung up, hopefully. And I do have a lot of straps over here. I'll go over those too. So this is called your balance strap. And this essentially helps to keep the saddle from shifting left or right. And everyone always wants to know, you know, doesn't it hurt the horse's back to ride this way? Which is a fair question. But the way that the saddle is designed is to keep you straight on the back of the horse. So as long as you stay straight and don't start leaning left or leaning right, you should be distributing your weight evenly on the middle of the horse. All right, so I don't have a lot of space here. I've been told we're not supposed to go over and cross the road, so I'm just gonna try to ride around over here and work with what I've got.
Yeah, go down around the
We don't mind if you cross the road.
Okay.
I just don't want kids crossing.
I'll walk around a second, then we'll probably walk over there. So you can see, you know, I've got no leg here. So if I really needed to steer him, I can use this to help act as pressure to help guide him. Which, you know, if you're out trail riding or fox hunting, you don't have to steer that accurately. But if you're doing dressage or show jumping, you do need to steer pretty well. So you have to figure out how to steer without that leg.
He's got an audience over there. Sorry.